Oscar Piastri leads home a McLaren 1-2, and there is disqualification drama for Ferrari. This is Shifting Happens. Hello, everybody. Back to be here, and welcome back to Shifting Happens. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Marshall, and we are here to discuss all things Chinese Grand Prix 2025. And working behind the scenes as diligently as always, we have the wonderful Fly. But today we are going to be starting on a rather sad note because earlier this week, Formula One lost one of its finest sons, that, of course, being Eddie Jordan. And we wanted to take just a few moments to pay tribute to him and everything that he did in our sport. Marshall, if you want to kick things off with an Eddie tribute.
Yep. Sorry, my camera seems to have lost itself here, but yeah, obviously, as a fan growing up, was a witness of the entire Eddie Jordan, journey, the entire right from 1991. I remember the race at Phoenix that they arrived in this cool green car with the 7-Up livery, and just thinking, oh, neat, a new team. But I was probably, I guess 1991, I would have been 8 or 9, and it was just neat to have a new team there. But it eventually became a really serious thing as you saw them contending and getting really good points finishes. And then I remember specifically 91 Spa, because De Cesaris was on for a win that day. And I remember just being like, De Cesaris, the guy that crashes all the time, is going to win a race? Like, I was a Senna fan as a child, of course. So, I was both cheering for Andrea, but also cheering for Senna. So it was a really strong memory. And then they kind of had their years in the weeds with the Yamaha and the Hart engines, and it took them a while of rebuilding back up. But Eddie Jordan was just such a personality and such an incredible story to do as well as he did in Formula One, and sort of the Piranha Club, where everyone is Ron Dennis and larger than life sort of figures. Eddie Jordan brought some levity and some real charisma to the grid in a way that sort of the super serious team principals of the time didn't really afford or sometimes enjoy. So a really sad loss. He was a good pundit and a good voice to have to speak to another era. He'll be sadly missed. But I mean, we have to remember that his legacy does live on in the team that he created. And they are now Aston Martin after several different iterations afterwards. But that team still survives. It didn't close up shop like so many other teams have over the course of Formula One history. So you can credit that to Eddie Jordan. And yeah, I think if you want to go back and just watch a classic race, put on that 1998 Belgian Grand Prix and watch that reaction of Eddie when his cars finish 1-2, and he can hardly believe it. It's a sad day or a sad week, but I think we can remember fondly the joy of the Jordan team and all they brought to Formula One.
Yeah, my biggest memories of Eddie actually are as a pundit because he'd already gone by the time I started watching the sport. I always knew who Jordan were, but I never really saw them race properly. That they were Midland or whatever they were called in 2007 or Spiker, and yeah, just before the Force India takeover. But I remember him as a pundit when there was the big broadcast switch from ITV to BBC in 2009, and he formed this incredible trio with David Coulthard and Jake Humphrey. Just the three of them together worked so well. and it was I remember clearly, and I shared the clips on social media this week of Eddie taking down Stefano Domenicali post Germany 2010 with the team orders controversy. Just an incredible, blunt piece of punditry, and he always called things as they were. I remember 2009, he basically said to McLaren, "Build a new car because the one you've built is rubbish." He was the first one to get the scoop on Michael Schumacher's comeback in 2010. He was the first one to get the scoop on Lewis Hamilton's departure from McLaren in 2012. And he was just such a colourful character. And I loved watching him as part of the coverage. He was incredible. And yeah, it's a real loss. Cancer is just the worst thing you could possibly imagine. And it's taken a good man from us, and he will be sorely missed. And just to see his impact is the way in which everybody reacted, and the outpourings of love that there have been for him over the course of the last few days and over the course of this Chinese Grand Prix weekend. I will never forget though Thiago Monteiro's podium. I've gone back and watched this when it was obviously the fast of the race at Indianapolis. And Michael and Rubens are a bit embarrassed to be there, and then Tiago's just like, "No, I'm going to take my moment." And I think that kind of symbolised uh, Jordan's time on the grid. Just embrace everything, have fun whilst you do it, but race hard. And that was a great moment. Just seeing Tiago absolutely live his best life in that very trying circumstance. But yeah, Eddie, thank you for everything. And you will be missed, but we will always remember the fun that you gave us. Right, let's talk about today's race. Let's talk about the Chinese Grand Prix. We'll do a brief chat on the sprint later on, but the results. Quick recap: Oscar Piastri taking a win, first win of the season for him, ahead of his teammate Lando Norris. George Russell, another podium for George Russell. I'm sure Fly is very happy about that. Then Max Verstappen beats both Ferraris on the road, finishing fourth. And then you had Ocon in fifth, Antonelli sixth, Albon seventh, Behrman eighth, Stroll ninth, 10th for Carlos Sainz, first point for him in a Williams. Isaac Hadjar in 11th, Liam Lawson in 12th, Jack Doohan 13th, Gabriel Bortoleto 14th, Hulkenberg, and then Sonoda. Alonso was a non-finisher, and then there were the three disqualifications of Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, and Pierre Gasly. But let's talk about the front of the grid. Let's talk about Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. Big weekend this for Oscar Piastri. He was definitely the quicker of the two McLarens. He came second in the sprint race, but behind Hamilton. And he was pretty dominant today. Took an outstanding pole position yesterday, and really controlled the race. Never looked under pressure. Never doubted that he was going to win it. Marshall, what did you make of Piastri today? Because I thought he was outstanding and a good comeback after Melbourne.
Yeah, I mean, he had the legs in qualifying. He didn't put a foot wrong in the race. I don't know how much pressure there really was coming from his teammate. I'm sure we'll see in subsequent races what McLaren's cushion is. Felt like Lando was very much nursing a braking issue coming to the end of the race, which kind of robbed us of them unleashing any sort of hint of their true pace. Not that I think they necessarily would have, but at least it would have given us the idea of what they're capable of. And basically, I think you can only do what's put in front of you, and he didn't put a foot wrong all weekend, and he had the best car, and he beat his teammates. So despite Lando's problems, he was ahead of him on the track before those sort of came up. So I don't know if the team would have let them battle. I guess you can say we were kind of left wondering about what the real state of play might be in McLaren. So it leaves some intrigue for future races. You're on.
That's a bad chairmanship there by Baxter. No, but of course, like we've got a couple of weeks now before we go to Suzuka. It still feels weird having Suzuka this time of year, doesn't it? I'm always used to it being in that nice October slot. But yeah, no, this is definitely teeing up at the moment to be a battle between Norris and Piastri for the title. I think you shouldn't count out Verstappen. I thought actually really outstanding drive by him to finish in fourth place and kind of come back from a horrible start. But um, yeah, Piastri. The one thing we all said about him, wasn't it, was his qualifying pace. It needed to improve. He had the legs on Norris. I mean, I still think if Norris had hooked up a lap, he probably would have got pole. But he just didn't quite get the car in the right areas in qualifying yesterday, and in the sprint qualifying, actually, to be fair. And I feel like he probably still has that edge, but Oscar definitely is closer in terms of qualifying. I don't think that's unfair to say.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
yeah. Sorry, just some technical issues here on my end, but yeah, I think that it wasn't a cracking Grand Prix, as they like to say on Sky, was it? um, I think after um, I think after Australia, um, we were kind of spoiled with a little bit of a surprise with the rain, but this might be a demonstration of the dominance that McLaren has in hand, unfortunately. But it as long as McLaren is this strong, it is going to be, like you say, a Lando and Piastri battle. Um, you just hope that papaya rules and Zach Brown doesn't interject itself and ruin the only intrigue we might have for the year. And I also do think that the other teams are going to come roaring back. Like, it's not going to be like a Red Bull 2023 situation where Max just walks every race. I think, McLaren is going to make hay while the sun shines here. And, while they have this advantage, but it's not going to last all year. I think that the other teams are going to catch up. At least I can
No,
hope.
yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I still think Ferrari have got a little bit of pace in hand. Mercedes, particularly in the hands of Russell, looks useful. I mean, he's had two third place finishes now, which is incredibly a great effort by him. And Verstappen is just consistently getting those top fives, which he absolutely needs in order to kind of keep himself in the championship fight. And we'll talk more about Red Bull in a bit. Um, but which other drivers impressed you, Marshall? Like Kimi Antonelli was driver of the day, which I think even he was a bit bemused by.
I
Um,
don't know what that was all about. It must have felt like you got robbed in Australia, kids, so we're gonna give you one here this weekend. But
I know, but like, who would you have picked for driver of the day if
I mean, in hindsight, and I was just talking to you before we went on on our chat there, that where did Ocon come from? Like, I know he finished seventh on the road, but that became fifth, as we'll talk about. Um, like, Haas was nowhere a week ago, or absolutely nowhere. And then, not only are they both in the points, but Ocon was right up in the fight of the midfield, like almost, well, he was best of the rest today, which, considering like all the talk out of preseason testing about how Haas has big problems with their car and how there's these, there was stories and rumors coming out about like they had a concept problem and just all this stuff being said about how they'd taken a step back, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually, here they are in seventh, and was Behrman 10th, or was
eighth?
he,
He was 10th on the
well,
road and then
10th on the,
came eight. Yeah.
yeah. So it's a pretty yeah, I'm not counting the disqualifications, just on the road. They were both
Mm.
in the points, which is, even that, I was like, wow, Haas. Like, I had to go back and watch it again just to see how they did it. And I'm still not quite sure where that pace came from. So it's a good shout. And I was concerned about Haas, with their driver changes and Ocon moving to a new team. And yeah, he's absolutely surprised me. Um, that was an excellent race. He would be my driver of the day, but he was barely on the TV is the problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I think one of the Haas boys would be a good shout for driver of the day. I thought Behrman starting on the hards, which was it wasn't the preferred strategy. Only him and Lance Stroll did it. And then you had and then he did 20 laps on the mediums and made it work. And you're like, if you're tire whispering in a Haas at the age of 19, then Jesus Christ, like this kid is something really special. Like we were praising Antonelli last week, but Behrman as well, and he did some beautiful overtakes as well. Sort of just nailed the down into the hairpin at the end of the long straight overtake. He was doing some of the best. I mean, Ocon had the overtake of the year, I think, when he took to the grass to overtake. I think it was Jack Doohan or Liam Law. I can't remember quite who was passing, but it was a wonderful overtake. That was probably the only time we saw Esteban. But somebody else I want to shout out is Lance Stroll. That boy's getting my hopes up again, and he's going to break my heart again because he has scored all of the points for Aston Martin. He's been very, very consistent, just in that sort of upper midfield area, and he's always there or thereabouts. And obviously, Alonso's been hit with the crash in Melbourne and the rotten luck with his brakes, but yeah, Lance is putting together so far at the moment a nice, just solid season, which for him is just all he needs. He doesn't need Brazil incidents all over again. Of course, it hasn't stopped the memes coming that Lance is now carrying Aston Martin on his back, just like his father wanted him to do. But it's yeah, I want to give Lance a bit of praise today because he's earned it. He's earned some well deserved praise for him. Now let's talk about Red Bull because there's a lot of drama with Red Bull at the moment. Liam Lawson once again has had a stinker of a weekend. He qualified 20th twice. Verstappen, by his excellent standards, didn't have the best weekend, really. He was third in the sprint after qualifying second. He got overtaken by Piastri and then had a bit of a horror show at the start of the main Grand Prix, but fought his way back. On low fuel, that car seems to be pretty good, but with high fuel, it just was a dog of a car to drive. But all of the talk has been about Lawson, so much so there was the clip that went viral with Ted Kravitz kind of laying into Christian Horner a little bit, saying, "You got rid of Checo for better results, and look, come on, we've got to talk about these results that are currently happening." But then there are now very big reports. Then there's two separate stories coming here, and I want to get your views on this, Marshall. But the first story is that Liam Lawson is basically both stories say Liam Lawson is gone. He's already out of the seat, and he's going to be somewhere at Suzuka in a couple of weeks' time to be replaced by Yuki Tsunoda. One story, which is what Ralph Schumacher and a couple of others have kind of said, is that he's gone. He goes back to Racing Bulls to partner Hadjar, and Yuki takes the seat. The other story I've heard, though the source isn't always 100% reliable, is that Yuki gets promoted to Red Bull, and then they do a deal with Alpine to get Franco Colapinto into the Racing Bull to replace the promoted Tsunoda, and Liam just drops off altogether, which I think would be ridiculous even by Red Bull standards. Your thoughts on Liam first of all, and then of the change that is probably going to happen.
Oh boy. So I like Liam Lawson, and I was expecting him to do better than this, obviously. I think that I'm just seeing a lot of nonsense from a lot of sources, and a lot of people who seem to want to blame him for being chosen for that seat, or seem to want to have it out for him or see him fail, which is really kind of, I mean, whatever. You can have your favorites. You can cheer against people. That's part of sports, right? But I just feel like Lawson, you didn't know who he was a year ago. You're only hating on him because you wanted someone else to get that seat. And I think the whole thing of this Red Bull situation is if Yuki had got that seat, there's a good chance, he might be doing marginally better than Liam is. I mean, it's hard to do worse than qualifying 20th twice, but I don't think that he would be on the pace. I don't think that it would have reflected well on him to come in and struggle in a car that no one except Max Verstappen can drive. So, you can if they had picked Yuki, the barometer is not Liam Lawson's current performances. It's just the underperformance that you would be doing compared to Max. And I still think that the better thing for anyone's career, be it Tsunoda or Hajar or Lawson, would have been to stay in the V-carb and be able to have lower expectations in an easier car to drive rather than higher expectations in a pig. And I just feel like everybody's forgotten the fact that Checo was run out last year. And I want to see everyone who was crapping on Checo all year last year learn Spanish and send that man an apology card, please. Like everyone on Threads and everyone on Twitter, send that man an apology card because he did not deserve the constant and total abuse that he got from, you know, fans and media when it wasn't, and we now clearly know it wasn't his fault or his problem. I feel like we now know just how deep the problems go at Red Bull and just how hard it is to prepare a car across the garage from Max Verstappen without his feedback providing you with direction on where to tune that car setup wise in order to make it drivable. That's, you know, three to four drivers now who have not performed up to expectations, and maybe the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. um, I would love to see, like, everybody's talking about, oh, they should replace Lawson, and I'm like, well, there's a guy who I think has a lot of Formula One experience, including a lot of experience with Red Bull, who is actually still being paid by Red Bull, who would be great for that seat, and his name's Sergio Perez. Like, why did you fire the guy if the problem is the car? So all this talk about, replacing Lawson, is like, well, if you fire him after 2 races, you're basically admitting you screwed up. Not Liam screwed up. You're admitting you screwed up. And, you're admitting you screwed up by firing Perez in the first place. And imagine if we had gone into this season with Checo still there, people would be clamoring for either of Yuki or Lawson to be in that seat. And oh, Checo's wasting a seat. It's like Checo'd probably be doing better, than either of them. And he at least knew the team and was bringing money in and sponsors and attention and Mexican fans and all that good stuff. So I know I criticized him when he had some disappointing races, but I've always been someone that likes Checo a lot. Like, I feel like I always wanted him to end his career in better terms, and he's actually had quite a bit of success at Red Bull in 2022 and 23. Like, he's had his moments and his wins, and his ever so brief period of time where he was looking on par with Verstappen was when the car was set up in a way that suited his style. So, yeah, I mean, this whole mess at Red Bull, I don't think it falls on any other drivers, and I just feel bad for all of them. But I also don't get the sympathy corner for Yuki Tsunoda because he's actually made out the best. Whether the intention of Red Bull was to protect him, the result of this decision is that he's actually in the best position of any Red Bull driver because he's been in this car that is easier and better to drive in a situation where he knows his engineer and he knows the team. And the car, all things created equal, for a mere mortal of a driver is better right now than the Red Bull. So, why would you want to move? I know he says he does, and he's going to say that, but you don't want to sound scared either from a challenge. But if I were him and had like truth serum, I'd be like, I don't want to touch that car with a 10-foot pole. But we'll see what happens. And it could be as simple as just swapping Lawson for Yuki for one race and just seeing, oh, Yuki's nowhere and Lawson's right on Hadjar. So clearly it's not the driver. But maybe they want to evaluate that. But I think they have enough data right now to say that that's the case because we've seen Lawson before and he's not this.
Yeah, absolutely. I do rate Liam as a driver, and clearly the problems that we are seeing right now is that it's the car. Like the car is definitely the issue. Like Max is able to get a tune out of it because he's Max Verstappen, and there is a very narrow performance window in which that car can be perfected, and only Max can access that window of performance. Liam just can't do it. And the problem that Red Bull have got is that, and this is something that Shez has said repeatedly, is that they make the fastest car possible, and you just have to get on with it. And again, only Max can get on with it. Eventually, I mean, Checo could do bits with it at the beginning of every season, but eventually he would drop off. Whereas Liam just can't get on top of that car. He just can't do it. And look, I think it's ridiculous to drop him after 2 races, to be perfectly honest with you. He's not delivering, but you're going to Suzuka, a track that he knows really, really well. Give him that opportunity to prove himself there. If he fumbles the bag and keeps doing what he's doing, okay, I might understand it a little bit more, but Red Bull just haven't learned from their mistakes. They've put a kid in who's had 11 Grand Prix starts and expected him to be the next Max Verstappen and come in and nail it instantly. And the problem with that strategy is the guy you're getting them to emulate is an all-timer and a guy that could end his career as the greatest driver of all time. So, it's just, Horner and Helmut Marko should really carry the can for this because this is the 3rd or 4th driver in a row. I mean, Checo had his moments, and he did help Max win that championship in 2021. So, could you necessarily call him a dud? I'm not sure in the grand scheme of things. But when you think of Gasly, you think of Albon, and you think of Lawson, they're duds. At the moment, like it's impossible to call them anything other than that. So it just mystifies me what's happening with Red Bull right now. It seems to me their only strategy now is rely on Max to win you a drivers' championship. They don't, obviously they care about the constructors and they want to win it, but if you said to them which one would you prefer, they'll take the drivers every single day of the week. That's what they really want. And I think they know that Max is probably got one eye elsewhere, be it Mercedes or Aston Martin, and they want to make sure they maximise their time with him and try and keep him there to honour his contract until the end of 2028. But it's a complete disaster zone right now. I completely agree with you. Why would Yuki want to go to that bear pit at Red Bull? I mean, he'll feel like he's earned his shot. And he will feel like he will do better than Liam. Maybe he will, but we'll have to see. And to the other rumor that they might put Franco Colapinto in the car, I'm sorry, that's just ridiculous. I think the only person who wants that move to happen is Jack Doohan. Like he's the only person that wants that move to happen. But we do have some comments from Horner, which Flies put up for us. So Horner said, there's always going to be speculation in the paddock. As I say, we've only just finished the race here. We'll take away the info and have a good look at it. And press further on there being a possibility of Lawson not racing at Suzuka. He delivered a similar line saying, look, I think everything is purely speculative at the moment. As I say, we've just finished this race. We're going going to take away the info and have a good look at it. I think Liam still has got potential. We're just not realizing that at the moment. I think the problem for him is he's had a couple of really tough weekends and he's got all the media on his back. The pressure just naturally grows in this business. I feel very sorry for him that you can see it's very tough on him at the moment. You know, it's this. I kind of see what Horner's trying to say here, that it's like we need to give this guy time. Yeah, and we need to give him time to adapt. And replacing him after 2 races, I think would be silly. I still think they're going to do it. I think you've got to be able to give the kid a chance to prove himself.
Can
2
I just
races is no time at all. Yeah, go on.
can I just say, like, if they do that, I think that's a tacit admission that they have no idea what they're doing. Like,
Yeah.
let's be honest here. Like, I saw some I got some threads when I was talking about the Yuki situation, and somebody was like replying back saying, "Well, don't you think that these, highly paid, highly competent championship winning teams know more than we do?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they probably do, but I still know what we see from the outside." And there's enough that you can see that their decision making process about drivers is broken. And whether that's helmet Marco or it's the way that, like, it could be an engineering problem compounded by a driver selection problem that is causing this, like, sort of escalating situation where you bring up these drivers, like, you've built your entire team around the premise of promoting young drivers, Checo accepted, which was also a tacit admission of failure that they took him to begin with. And um, they took Checo and left him for 3 years until he, eventually befell the same fate of his junior, um, you know, more junior predecessors, right? So obviously, if you're taking knowledge in, okay, we promoted 2 young drivers too quickly. Albon and Gasly have gone on to look great in their respective teams. They've gone on to be competent, excellent Formula One drivers that are capable of putting in results in inferior machinery. Um, and they've done very well for themselves since leaving Red Bull. Checo is a guy who had copious amounts of Formula One experience, driving in the midfield, being a giant killer and a tire whisperer. All of a sudden, if he can't drive a car and he can't manage the tires, that's got to tell you something. Like, he didn't just stop being Checo Perez overnight. So there's something wrong in their process, and it doesn't, we don't have to have all of the information to know that this just doesn't make sense. And I think if you look at how bad, um, Lawson's first 2 races have been, it speaks to a problem that's been getting progressively worse. And it actually makes Checo's performances last year not look excusable, but look less egregious. Like, he was still, even though he would get knocked out in Q1 or he'd get knocked out in Q2 or he'd, have issues, in stops or traffic or whatever, he was always there at the end or thereabouts at the bottom or the middle of the points. Like, he was coming back to drives that were like 7th, 8th, ninth sometimes, and that looked really bad in a Red Bull. But 7, 8, 9 looks a heck of a lot better than finishing 14th in a Red Bull and qualifying 20th, both races out, right? So, maybe we grade on a curve, I don't know. But, this is the Checo Perez apology corner on this episode today for me, because Checo, I always believed in you and I never said anything bad about you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say is, I mean, I told him to go F himself last week, and I still stand by that. But do we think that Helmut Marko's just got lucky with finding 2 all timers? Like, let's think about this realistically. Like, most drivers he's put in those cars has kind of sucked, other than Seb and Max and Danny Rick. Like, literally those 3.
But no, I don't agree with that because Sainz is good, Albon's good, Gasly's
But
good. They're just
here's the
not
thing.
good in Red Bull cars.
That's the thing. He can find the talent, but when he doesn't pick the right drivers for the team that he's employed to pick the drivers for, those guys you've mentioned have all gone away from Red Bull and thrived.
Yeah, but Albon
Um,
and Gasly were good in AlphaTauri,
yeah, I mean,
and
obviously Gasly got the win, and he did well. But I feel like since they've left, they've grown massively and
mhm.
grown to a place where bit higher, grown to what's the I'm really screwing this one up. The joys of being live. I feel like they've had a better room to grow as drivers, and they are better drivers than I think they could have been within the Red Bull system. And I feel like if Liam, let's say Liam gets signed up by Cadillac next year, then I feel he'll do really well with that team. And outside of the Red Bull environment, he will do better. And I think there has to be questions asked of Helmut Marko of, are you actually doing right by these drivers? Because Arvin Lindblad is the one that they're talking about. He's a very, very good young driver who wants to say that he gets promoted into the junior team at some point this season and maybe falls short and gets promoted to Red Bull for next year and falls short. And it'll be the same mistake over and over again. It would be ludicrous. And I think right now the Red Bull empire that has been built, we can now very clearly see that it's been built on a foundation of sand. And the last thing holding them together basically is Max. And if Max goes, I think that's game over for them. And they have to do a serious rebuild. And could be that they have to completely burn it down to the ground. Marco has to go, Horner has to go, and they start again with a new management team. We'll
Well,
see where they
Ford is
go
the
from there.
question. Do they have the ability to do that with Ford coming in?
Uh, Maybe in time, Ford could possibly take more, not ownership, but more control and put some of their own guys in. I don't know. This is just me speculating. This is no inside information that I clearly don't have. So, yeah. But look, I think this Liam Lawson situation is one to keep an eye on. And if there is a movement in the driver market, then obviously we will talk about it on here, and we can make a call from there. Next up, okay, so we need to talk about the DQ drama. There were 3 drivers disqualified. Pierre Gasly was one of them. The others were the 2 Ferrari drivers of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. And actually, I have obtained a exclusive video from Maranello that they've sent to me very kindly. I've sent it to Fly to play. And yeah, just get this official word from Ferrari, please.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer every night.
Yeah, obviously it's heartbreaking to see. It's a shame AJ's not here actually, because I feel it's important that he's here to discuss this. But yeah, it's real. So I can't keep a straight face. Yeah, it's a meme I've made and put it on social media. But yeah, Ferrari's horror show continues. DQ for Charles Leclerc for being underweight. Seems like the one-stop underweight issue that hit George Russell has continued. And it was the same with Gasly. They were both underweight, not by much at all. And then we had the disqualification for Lewis Hamilton was that his rear skid block was, I think, half a millimeter worn away too much, like was too little by half a millimeter. And with these things, the FIA are incredibly strict. They always have been. And yeah, they've been disqualified, rightfully so. It's a repeat for Leclerc and Hamilton from what happened in Texas in 2023. So yeah, disaster for Ferrari. What had been a good start to the weekend and a difficult race, but they got some solid points out of it. But then, of course, it's now just become a complete horror show for them, to the point where Esteban Ocon has surpassed Nico Hulkenberg as the leading Ferrari driver in the championship. But Marshall, this is this is a horror show for Ferrari. I mean, it just couldn't get any worse for them, could it?
Well, it's just the infringement for Leclerc makes sense. It's a similar situation to Russell in Spa last year, where they had more tire wear than they were expecting because the hard tires were managing to go to the end. So they ran them for far more laps, which took more mass off of the tires than what they're expecting, and a kilo of tire rubber was the difference, and that's exactly what happened to Russell. It's basically the lack of flexibility that Ferrari put into to their um, to their plan, like to their options, by not running it, like running it so close to the tolerance, like within a kilogram of tire rubber of the tolerances, right? To not give them the strategic options to go to the end, which we see everybody else except Gasly did, right? Like everybody else who did the one stopper with the early stop managed to get to the end and pass. So it just shows the operating tolerances there, that they're pushing the envelope to try and get performance, and they're just going over it. And the more troubling thing for me, if I was a Ferrari fan, or if I am someone who predicted Ferrari would win the championship this year, which, you know, I'm really I'm really regretting right now. Um, I think that you have to be concerned that they're going to such lengths for pace and they don't have it. So if they're running on a tolerance of like absolutely no margin to pick up to pick up weight, and on the cool down lap, and it's still not enough to pass the scrutineering, then absolutely that's a troubling thing. And then the fact that it happened on Lewis's car with a different infringement, and it's not even like this track is billiard table smooth, like they just resurfaced it and it looked perfectly smooth, and the curbs here are not aggressive at all. Like I when I heard that there was a skid plank issue on one of the cars, I was like, at this track in this race, like it just seemed really bizarre that that would happen, because this isn't like Austria where you're pounding the cars over curbs and wearing away the skid block every lap. This isn't like a washboard surface like Montreal, where we have harsh winters up here and the track gets cracked, and you're going over bumps on the back straight. In any of those situations, or Texas where it's really bumpy too, like that where it happened before, that's a really bumpy track. We know that. The MotoGP guys chronically complain about the bumps at Coda. So it's definitely weird, and it just speaks to Ferrari kind of running it way too close to the margins, which speaks to a larger lack of confidence that they're having to, like, they just have no margin for error and they're kind of right on the very edge. Um, it's troubling. It's definitely not a good sign for Ferrari. Um, Again, like the Charles one makes sense. But if you even think that there's a possibility, like I wouldn't take Ferrari's excuse that they didn't expect the tire to go to the end, because you hadn't run the hards all weekend, so you didn't have data to back that up. You always have to leave the possibility open that you find out that the tire just keeps on going. And like we were seeing Lance, he's still riding on those hard tires now, run around, just keep on going. Those tires aren't going anywhere. And once you saw Lance be able to run on them for as long as he could, I really don't know why anyone would stop. Hamilton went for a blinder because he knew he was vulnerable to Verstappen anyway. I don't think he lost from it. But the Racing Bulls, oh my goodness, what are you doing? But can get onto them later. This is supposed to be Ferrari corner. But I don't know. I think that it speaks to a lack of confidence that they have, that they're pushing their operational parameters so close to the tolerances, and that scares me more than them getting disqualified.
Yeah, Lewis was quite sanguine after the race. He was. He said, "Look, we tried a little change because we want to try and get more performance out of the car, and it just didn't work." And obviously, that was quite clear to see, wasn't it? Yeah, that they just whatever pace they had in the sprint, particularly Lewis, just wasn't there in qualifying yesterday or in the race today. I mean, one thing I would say though is I feel like we are back in the bad old days of the old regs where clean air is king. And if you're running in dirty air, it is just destroying your tires and destroying your performance. Like we saw that in the battle between Leclerc and Verstappen. Like obviously, Leclerc had his front wing issue. With, I'd say a bit of an opportunistic look up the outside of Lewis in the opening lap. But yeah, it.
I mean, are
He,
we
the
not
way
even going
he,
to talk about how Ferraris like hit each other and Charles drove the whole race with his wing broken?
well, yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like it's yeah, it felt to me like just I'll finish my point. It's like the way Verstappen just drove past him and the way Charles tried to then fight him, but then just completely lost all the performance because the dirty air hit his front, which was already compromised, and he just kind of washed out and Max drove away from him, and it was. Yeah, and we saw other drivers falling foul of it in the sprint as well. Like they were struggling to overtake, and at a track like China where you can overtake, this is a troubling moment. I feel for for the teams.
You're bang on, man. Like that's absolutely exactly what I was thinking, and it was a moment, like you say, the bad old days. I think I actually said exactly the same thing in a chat with, like in a chat that I was having during the race. It's like, remember those old days with if you get within 3 seconds of another car, they're whining about dirty air. Guess what? They're back because
Yeah,
when Lando was, they were like, okay, Lando, you need to go faster to cover off George, and he's like, I don't want to, because he didn't want to get into the dirty air. And I looked at the timing thing and I actually had the F1 TV up, which is awesome, by the way. I cannot speak highly enough of the F1 TV. If you can get it, I'm so impressed with it. This was the first race I ever had it. It's so cool. I had the gaps and the timing and everything up on the side and the little track map, and I'm like, they're not even that close together. And then I was looking at their times and it's like they're 3.5 seconds, and Lando's complaining about dirt. He's in Oscar's dirty air. Like, yeah, we are in the bad old days, man. It's bad, and
yeah,
it's ridiculous that, maybe, last year I was saying, when this year was shaping up to be a really good season, when everybody was starting to converge at the end of the last year, and I was like, oh, it's such a shame that we have to change this rule set just as it's coming good. I think maybe they knew that the gains on the original premise of these regulations wasn't coming to fruition, and that the teams were starting to get a little too clever, and that the dirty air problem that this design and the ground effects were supposed to fix is not any better than probably what it was at the end of the last rule set. If we're being completely honest, it kind of feels the same.
oh, absolutely. And obviously, we got the rumors going around that they want to postpone the next year's regs and bring in V10s, and it like the regulation set at the moment is an absolute mess. And I'm sure we'll have a wider discussion about the will there be new regs next year or not on another episode. But yeah, things like that are just it's not looking good at the moment. And I think Mohammed Ben Sulayem is a little too keen to get re-elected with his pledge to bring back V10s, which, to be honest with you, I'm okay with. But it's like, really, like, you want to do it now? This is a little bit silly.
Well, Stefano agrees, so.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and we've got a comment here from Last Resort. Mr. Star, have you guys talked about the way it's starting to look like a less dominant version of 14-16 Mercedes? We've kind of touched on the fact that I mean, no, it's not that dominant because I mean, Mercedes were dunking 30 seconds on people, but and I wouldn't say that they're very beatable, McLaren. But I was talking about bad old days of dirty air just ruining everybody behind and not getting many overtakes. So we have spoken about that. But yeah, let's go back to Ferrari, because yes, there was the incident on lap one, which, as far as I'm concerned, was a racing incident. It wasn't an awful thing. It was a little bit silly by Charles, but he was the one that paid the penalty for it. Also, we thought. And then,
Well,
there was the
I mean, I think that Charles got offset by the air wash and just under like oversteer, got a snap and then skidded out. Like I don't think he wanted to do that. I think it was just
no,
one of
no, no.
those things.
Yeah, and then obviously there was the team orders situation, which, like, F1 TV need a bit of a slap for that, because, or whoever was running the world feed, because so essentially what has happened is that the way it was presented to us was that they had said to Lewis, you need to swap the cars, and Lewis has said, oh, I'll do it when I'm closer, and then you got bad faith actors in the press basically saying that Lewis is arguing with his engineer again. And then Fred Vasseur comes out and says, no, 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 no. He was speaking to Dutch TV. He said, no, no. Lewis asked for the change to happen because he was struggling and he could see that Charles was quicker. So let's stop all this nonsense with we ordered Lewis and he was arguing with Ricardo Adami. Lewis asked for the switch, and it was just about making sure we did the switch as safely as possible, which they then did. And then, of course, Lewis then did the pit stop, which didn't work. And I think you're right. It was he was on a hiding to nothing. I think Max was going to pass him anyway. But yeah, what's your view on this team orders controversy in inverted commas? Because I mean, the press have really, well, it's not their fault. It's the world feed that has done Ferrari dirty there.
Yeah, I feel like it's a big nothing. I think that it was funny when Fred Vasseur was like, "Oh, they have you know misconstrued or whatever." I just wanted to like use that first time meme where it's like, "Are you new here, Fred?" Like this, I'm sure Toto Wolff was having a chuckle to himself when he heard that, because they've always kind of done this where they will manufacture needle between teammates where it doesn't necessarily exist, or they will try and create the narrative of you know team orders or team order drama when it's actually just a matter of working it out between the teammates. Wasn't it like Silverstone or Silverstone 22 or 22 or 23? The one Science's first win where they had
Silverstone 22, yeah.
so they had the drama between him and Charles there that day, and it was like actually Charles was pretty on board with that whole situation. It was just kind of construed as in the moment being a little bit more dramatic than it was. And I feel like this is just the same thing. It's like Lewis is trying to deal with driving a car and lapping and trying to lose the least time. So he knows his teammates faster, but he's not going to compromise his own race to make this happen. So he's just waiting for Charles to be close enough, and two to get by Stroll there, who was in the way and wasn't lapped. Actually, that was for position because he was running long. And then they kind of made this whole thing of when are they going to do it, but it was never a question. Like even with the clips that you got, it was never a question that Lewis said he wasn't going to do it. It was just the timing needed to be right. So it was a big something out of nothing. See Last Resort's comment here in the chat about
Yeah, yeah.
making fake drama by misconstruing things. I think that to be fair, like I am one of the biggest detractors of Drive to Survive you're probably gonna find, but the coverage has always kind of tried to do this, where they try and make stories more interesting, especially if the race is boring. So if there isn't a lot to talk about, they will try and make these things. That part of it's not new. It's like the old Murray Walker thing. It's like, oh, he's catching him by 0.3 seconds a lap, but he's catching, trying to make sure that everybody's still watching. And it's as old as time. It's all part of the show, Fred. Don't get mad about it. You're playing the game now. You want to lead a competitive team. That's all part of it. That's, you're not at Sauber anymore. This is the big time.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of brings me on to the next topic, and it's there's been a lot of talk in the press before this weekend about Lewis's radio messages in Australia, and that kind of narrative started to kind of get flared up again before the DQ came in of Lewis disagreeing with his race engineer again. And I'm just going to be frank here, in the spirit of Eddie Jordan, why do we have to hold Lewis to a different standard to every single driver on the grid? And let me put it this way, why do we have to hold the only black driver on the grid to a different standard? Because, what we have to remember is he was in his first race with a new race engineer. They'd never done a race distance together. They'd never done a race together. And I don't think what Lewis was saying was particularly bad. And if you look at some of the comments today, you had Lando getting quite shirty with his race engineer, Yuki getting very shirty with his race engineer. And Lewis quite rightly raised some of the times that Max has kind of thrown, paddies on the radio to GP, and yet you've got Lewis in the most British way possible, just going, "Would you please leave me alone? I know what I'm doing." Like, you cannot get more British than that, and yet all of a sudden he's being dragged in the press by people who should know better. It's really disrespectful the way he raced. He spoke to his engineer. Well, no, they're just trying to work out their working relationship.
Well, wasn't he the same guy that Carlos said stop inventing to?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And he was Seb's race. He was Seb's race engineer as well, and Seb gave him hell on occasion.
Yeah, like stop inventing. Like Carlos was getting way more testy with, was it Ricky? Ricardo Adamo is his name, right? He was getting more testy with him than Lewis ever has in some of his races, and nobody like everybody. Oh, that's science sticking up for himself or running his own race or knowing what he needs and just going for it and making his engineer listen to him. But when Lewis does it, all of a sudden it's this big controversy. But again, I do think part of it is the fact that Lewis going to Ferrari is the big story and all anyone wants to talk about. And whenever you put Lewis's name in a headline in a negative or controversial light, it generates more clicks and people are more happy to let that narrative sort of percolate out there. And I mean, we've seen it, we know it. If you put Lewis's name into a YouTube headline, that gets more clicks. And if you put Lewis's name in a headline with criticism, then it gets like way more clicks. And it's not fair, but a lot of these times, like, people are chasing algorithms or they're chasing stories or they're chasing clicks, and everybody was waiting for a year and 3 months for Lewis to, or year and 2 months for Lewis to join Ferrari. So it's all anyone wanted to talk about. And luckily, that sprint will shut some people up. Certainly, he's exceeded any expectations that I had of when he would be competitive with Charles. Like, they're pretty even. Today, obviously, Charles had legs on him in race pace, but Lewis won the sprint. So, call that a draw. And yeah, he's already won for Ferrari. So I think that'll go a long way to getting people to just shut up and realize that he's still at that high level. This
Yeah,
isn't
absolutely.
a retirement home move for him. This is a competitive move, and Charles is gonna not. I thought that Charles would have a few race run here of being clearly above Lewis's performance as he gets used to the car and the team, and it's just not the case. They're way closer than even I imagined, and I guess I underestimate Lewis Hamilton at my own peril because you can never underestimate the guy.
No, absolutely. And we've got a couple of comments here from Last Resort. I'm seeing it with Charles slightly as well, but it's crazy the criticism Lewis was getting. And then the other comment, which was Max gets the same when he gets testy, but GP gives it back. So I think that lessens it a bit. Maybe Lewis should tell his engineer to do the same, get the media to leave them alone as they adapt. I mean, I agree with that completely. And as I said before, I feel like I just have to raise the question again: why are we holding the only black driver on the grid to a different standard to everybody else? I think we all know why, but I have to pose that question. But as you said, Marshall, it wasn't an entirely dud weekend for Ferrari because, of course, Lewis did win the sprint race. Now, I know you're not a fan of sprint races. You've been very open about the fact that you don't like sprint races, but in terms of last resorts, absolutely nailed it on the head there with that last comment. You know, why on earth are we? Sorry, no. Like, what did you make of Lewis's performance in the sprint race? Getting that first win for Ferrari, getting the first ever sprint win for both himself and for Ferrari as well. I mean, it was a superb performance.
So I'm going to say this is why I don't like the sprint. And it's not going to be for the reason that you think. Lewis had a brilliant drive and won for Ferrari, but all we're talking about is the nightmare Grand Prix for Ferrari. Like, we've completely forgotten about the sprint already because today was another day. And, already that performance that netted him 8 points, which this is another problem I have with the sprint, is it nets you 8 points, which is the same points that the seventh place finisher gets in the Grand Prix. Like, it's nothing. It's really nothing. And the drivers kind of treat it like nothing. It's like, hey, I won. It's like that. I'm gonna just like talk about memes, but it's like hey, this is worthless. It's like when Piastri got his first win and it was in a sprint. It felt deflating because you want to see a driver's first win when it really counts, and you want to see Lewis Hamilton's first win with Ferrari in a Grand Prix setting where he wins and he gets all the flowers and all the credit. Like, that was a great drive out of nowhere. He paced the field. He got an amazing pole. He was in clear air the whole way, and it was great. But turn the page, go to tomorrow. You go right into qualifying a few hours later, and Ferrari's struggle bus started, and then that's the whole narrative. Like, it's like the sprint never even happened. And I mean, we jumped right into it in this episode talking about the race, and now we're just talking about the sprint as an afterthought. So
100%, yeah.
what is it for? And what does it mean when you win a sprint? Like, what goes into the record book? What does it count as? You won, but you didn't win the thing that anybody cared about. And it's just, I hate it because it's a solution to a problem that didn't exist. And it's like creating a new thing, but only in 6 races a year. So it's not like you can catch up. Oh, Oscar has, 2 sprint wins and Lando has 2, and well, you got to wait until when's the next one? Silverstone? I don't even remember.
I've got it.
Austria?
Hang on. I shall have a look for you in my
But
book.
it does.
Miami. Miami's
Miami.
the next one. Yeah.
So we've got to wait like 5 more races until the next sprint, and it feels so random. You show up this weekend and it's like, oh yeah, it's a sprint weekend. Ah, crap, that means I've got to get up extra early to watch the sprint, or qualifying is going to be while I'm at work, or depending on where you live in the world, it throws up your schedule and makes it weird because you're used to a certain cadence on a Grand Prix weekend of when things happen. And then you're like, oh, this weekend's a sprint. And you're like, ah, crap, I'm going to miss. At least they've moved qualifying proper to Saturday now, because qualifying
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
Grand Prix on Friday was dumb. But if you want to watch sprint qualifying, it's always on when I'm at work. Always. I never see it. I'll watch it when I
So
get home, but I already know the result. The whole thing is just a mess.
So the sprint races this year, you've got one in Miami in May. Then we've got a couple of months, and then it's Spa. Which I never understand why they use Spa for a sprint race.
Doesn't make sense.
And then you've got, and that's the first weekend after the summer break as well, which is going to be Eggy. And then we've got Austin, Brazil, Qatar are the remaining 3 after that.
Cool.
So yes, yeah.
I don't know why you do a sprint at such a long track as Spa, because it'll only be like a handful of laps. Like the fans won't even get to see anything. It just
comment from Lost Result. I'm sure it's mainly a money grab, more expensive advertising for a sprint of a practice. I'm sure. Oh, absolutely, complete money grab. But if you're going to do the sprint, don't half-ass it. Like, do it like MotoGP did. MotoGP were just like
every round,
every single round, we just do sprint.
Yeah,
and they didn't like it, but they've had to deal with it. And if you want to do a sprint, just do it every single round, and off you go. Yeah, and if you can find a way to make it more interesting, then fine. But right now, they don't seem to have found a good way of making it interesting. So we'll have to see how the rest of the sprints plays out. Actually, I'll just give you the point scorers from the sprint. So obviously Hamilton won it, Piastri second, Verstappen third, George Russell fourth, Charles Leclerc fifth, Tsunoda sixth, Antonelli seventh, and then Lando Norris, championship leader, actually had a bit of a stinky race. He only came in eighth, and there was one penalty actually. The same guy who got penalised in the main Grand Prix, Jack Doohan, spun Gabriel Bortoleto around, I think on the last lap, and then he got a penalty in the main Grand Prix as well for forcing Isaac Hadjar off. Both of those were slam dunk 10-second penalties. No argument from me there. Just one last topic before we go, and I think we should talk about it, particularly with Fly working away in the background. George Russell has had an incredible start to the season with Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli has been very, very impressive, but George, I think, has put together a really solid start to the season. I think he is starting to really make an argument for himself as being the fastest guy over one lap, because that qualifying lap yesterday was out of this world, and I thought he handled the race brilliantly. I know friend of the channel Diplo is.
I was going to mention him too.
And he may or may not be watching right now, but he is utterly convinced that George is going to frost his way to a title. I'm not 100% sold on it, I'm afraid, Diplo. But he's had a brilliant start to the season. And I see Fly wants to come and talk about his boy George.
No, good evening, by the way. I'm just here at work trying to do a lot of stuff, but I hear the words George Russell and Mercedes, and that to me brings music to my ears. I think it's been a heck of a start. I see the teamwork between both drivers. I see the communication. I see that Toto is just letting them figure each other out, right? And I think for once, and I hate to say it, it's nothing against Lewis or anything like that, but now the admin for both Instagram or Twitter, they're doing extra videos, extra sit downs with both drivers recap. Like I saw one this morning that Kimi and George are now on like they're both on a sitting bench and they're talking about the experiences for the first two races, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, I don't remember this when George's first year against Lewis, anything like that. So I'm not sure if maybe Toto and the team themselves overall have decided to use a different approach. But right now, listen, both guys are doing the best of what they, of what's in front of them. And I think what George said was very important. Every little point counts right now, especially at the beginning of the season when your car is not the best. But being able to compete and get as much out of it versus a McLaren, right, for the first two races, especially in a track, right? It was Kimi's first time on that track. And I believe George's strongest position on that track was what, 7th or 8th, I believe so, or something like along those lines. So to be able to have that start, knowing how powerful the McLaren is, Max hasn't yet peaked, right? And we know at some point the Ferraris are going to get there because they always do somehow, some way. I think it's a great start for the Mercedes team. You got one more race in Suzuka, and then, after that, I'm going to do this. But so far, I feel like George Russell, he's racing like a driver that knows he's on a 1-year contract, and it's not that he's trying to prove himself; he's trying to prove it to himself, right? You no longer have that shadow, right, of the GOAT. You know that this is now your team. If you do not perform, there is somebody in another team that certainly listen. And I hate to say this and it hurts me deeply when I say this, but any team on the grid will be stupid enough not to sit down and have a conversation with Max Verstappen. Everybody has to do their due diligence. I know here in the States, a lot of people didn't like Tom Brady. Well, if Tom Brady had a 1-year contract, every single team will be sitting down with him. Hey, listen, we're gonna have that we're gonna have that talk, whether we like the player or not. It's still one of the best that has ever performed in your sport. So this type of pressure, it does something sometimes to people. And George is playing loose. Okay, he hasn't had one of those reckless things. Yes, he had that little miscue last week in Melbourne, but so far he's kept it cool. Yes, he got passed by Lando in the first lap and whatever the case is, but we know that McLaren eventually was going to be 1 and 2 unless Lando made a mistake. And as we saw in the sprint, he gets caught up in that train of 7, 8, and 9, and then it's kind of hard for him to go forward with that because of dirty air. But so far, I think it's been a heck of a start by both drivers at Mercedes. And I think Toto has a plan in set, and this has to keep going. You know what I'm saying? If there's any setback, it can't be on the driver's performance. It's going to be on the car itself. Because I think it's about time that Mercedes has a much more consistent car throughout the year, besides what we've seen back in the last 3 years, where the car, like enough with these, we don't know how we won the race, but we won the race. We're just trying to figure out how. So we don't want to do that anymore. So, but yeah, I think both guys have had a heck of a drive, but George Russell in particular has taken upon himself to not only be the leader of the team, but to know that, this is my time to put up. I don't have time to waste, because I could have my foot right out the door if I don't take advantage of the situation that now I know is at hand in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely, Fly. I completely agree with you. It's a trick. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely maximized his performance. I mean, I think in Australia he didn't really do anything particularly spectacular, but he just took it by preparation meets opportunity, and just like in Austria last year, he was there to take advantage of the situation developing in front of him. And this time, he was definitely the best car behind the McLarens. As for Antonelli, he lost a lot of downforce. He actually went over Charles' end plate, and that caused a lot of damage on his floor. So actually, for him to finish P8, that's what was it in the end? Results. P6 in the end. That's a hell of a result for Kimi. Hell of a result.
Well, I think, and you got your Mercedes gear on there, Baxty. I feel good for Mercedes fans who are sticking around, because this is not Lewis's fault, obviously, because he was not it was not his fault what happened in Abu Dhabi, just like it wasn't Max Verstappen's fault what happened in Abu Dhabi. But then, the precipitous decline of the W13 and the sort of recalcitrance of the W14, where it would be good one weekend and absolutely terrible the next weekend, and just I felt like last year they were a little more consistent. At least their valleys weren't as deep as some of the previous years. They did have a few shockers last year, but I feel like there was just this brooding toxicity among the team and the fan base of the team more broadly. There was a lot of manufactured conflict between George and Lewis that didn't actually exist in the reality, but did in the minds of the fans. That was thinking that what happened was wrong, but we're kind of lamenting the fact that Mercedes didn't have the equipment to compete and right that wrong on their own terms. So then it became this battle between George and Lewis, and you just I don't want to talk about social media is not real life, but I think that there was a sort of when Fly says about the the social media content that they're making with the drivers. Like that didn't happen with Lewis and George because it would have created chaos on their stream, and they knew it. Like they weren't going to poke that bear. So they were very
Well,
quiet about it, and
it's also because Lewis didn't want to do it. There was part of his contract that he didn't do much social media content. He did little bits here or there, but
But I mean, at the
it
same
wasn't
time, like,
purely because of the fan base.
did you ever read their? Well, I know you've read. Anytime they tweeted anything, there would just be absolute insanity and pandemonium in the replies. And that
Yeah,
must be exhausting in the team when, you've got this feeling of just sort of this hangover of negativity on top of the fact that you don't have a competitive car. And then, as that's starting to fade, Lewis makes the decision to jump to Ferrari. So you have this really awkward year of knowing he's leaving and having to prioritize the driver is staying without disrespecting the man who gave you 7 titles and could have easily given you an 8th. And, having to do that in a way that was respectful of his legacy and of his stature without like acknowledging to the world that you're prioritizing the guy that's staying, because that's he's driving next year's car. Lewis is driving a Ferrari, and you don't want to give away secrets to the guy who's going to be in the red car next year. Like that's just how Formula 1 works. It's how it goes. Like Mercedes would have had to put up a firewall within the team to keep information about the 2025 car away from one of its 2024 drivers for the entire season. And that just creates a dynamic within the team that can get really icky. And I'm sure nobody felt great all year. You're losing your most successful driver. You're kind of in this limbo of like you want to give your new guy the best chance of success, but at the same time, he's not always as fast as Lewis, and he's not always, going to be moving over and getting out of the way when they're, in close contact. So I think for all Mercedes fans, the last 3 years have been pretty brutal.
Hell.
And
They've been hell, yeah.
even if Mercedes does just as well as they did last year, or just as poorly, if you're grading on Mercedes' standard of excellence, I feel like you're going to feel a lot better about it this year. You're going to enjoy it a lot more because your expectations are now not bringing Lewis his 8th title. That has gone to someone else. That's someone
Yeah.
else's job now. And you can just be the best version of Mercedes that you can be and provide your drivers with the best car that you can for that weekend. And you're just watching it like the rest of us without this burden of expectations. I imagine it feels quite freeing. And I bet you it's freeing for George and for everyone in the team.
It is freeing. I completely agree with you. It is freeing, and it's quite nice just to see George kind of just go about his business and not see people commenting. I mean, it is the duality of Baxty this season, because obviously I am I am a Mercedes guy. I will be a Mercedes guy, but I'm also a Lewis Hamilton guy, and I want to see him do well at Ferrari. So I'm kind of in this awkward space where I'm like, Lewis won the sprint race. That's great. I'm really happy to see that. But at the same time, Mercedes have had 2 podiums this year. Lewis, are you sure, mate? Are you sure? And then at the same time, you see social media comments where you've got like Lewis fans going like, "Oh my god, Toto said this about Lewis, and he's so bitchy," and they're the bitchy ex. It's really horrible position for them to be in. But at the same time, look how well Lewis is doing, and you can clearly see that there was sabotage going. And you've got Mercedes just sat there now catching these strays from Lewis Hamilton fans going like, what did we do? We did nothing. We're just here doing our thing. Leave us alone, please. I think you're the bitchy ex now. It's a horrible situation still, and some cult LH fans need to just wind their neck in and just move on from Mercedes. You put that behind you. Go and just focus on Ferrari right now because you've got things to complain about over there, like like genuine things to complain about, like poor strategy and everything else. It's just like, okay, is he going to win the 8th this year? Not looking likely. As nice as that sprint win was. Let's go to a couple of the comments here. We've got one from Soza7878. So good they named him twice. George is a dangerous outsider for the title. Possibly, but I think it's a big outside shot, I think. And he's put another comment saying Max is the fastest guy over one lap. I don't agree with that. I would still say it's Charles Leclerc, but I think it's close. Yeah, I'd say it's Charles Leclerc. I don't know how you feel about that, Marshall.
I agree. Max is marginally faster, but it's close.
Fair enough. And then Last Resort says maybe George will get some proper screen time next Grand Prix. Like, no, let's not be silly. Come on now. George doesn't need that pressure on him. And then George is just solid. He gets the result that he can get.
That's just me.
That's you. That's you.
I'm just replying back.
Do you guys think that Max figured something out that last stint with how to drive the car, or did he just save his tyres better than the others? I think it's probably saving his tyres a little bit better, but also I think that car clearly just didn't run well on high fuel. Like he seemed a bit mystified in his interview. He was a bit like it just got better. So clearly he was struggling on with a higher fuel load, and then as the fuel burnt off, he was able to get a bit more performance out of the car. So he's not going to be feeling too happy about that. And I don't think we're going to see him go and do a 10 race in a row winning streak simply because the competition around him is so much better than it was in 2023.
Yeah, I think it was weird how the hard actually got faster. Like there was a period at which like you were kind of on a sweet spot on the hard tire when it had about 15 laps on it. It was actually faster than when it was new. It was very bizarre. And I mean, part of that is the fuel going down, but I think it was consistent enough on any fuel load because we saw it in Lance's stint too, that it actually got faster as it wore down, which is highly unusual.
Yeah, because I mean, Lewis was on the fresher tires and he wasn't that much faster than the guys in front of him. By the end, Lando was doing relatively similar lap times to him because I know Lewis had the fastest lap and then that's now gone to Lando, even though they don't get a point for it anymore. So, make of that. Yeah, it's just that clearly the hard tires weren't as bad as people thought they were going to be. It's just they just didn't have the data. Right, Marshall, you have been an absolute legend, my friend. Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on Threads and Instagram, double waved yellow, DVL waved yellow. Usually just arguing about, penalties and stewards and how everybody doesn't know how those things work. So sometimes it's hard to defend the FIA, but somebody's got to.
We got our brilliant producer Fly. You can find him at Apex63 on Twitter. And you can find me, BaxTB, on Twitter. You can also find me, BaxTBF1, on Threads. And you can find me, all of our links are in the description below anyway, but I thought I'd just give you promotion. And if you've enjoyed this episode of Shifting Happens, then please do hit the subscribe button below. Like it as well, because the algorithm seems to enjoy it when you hit the like button. And if you're watching this on catch up, then please do comment, and we will try and get to your comment as quickly as we can. It'll be one of us replying on the Shifting Happens account. But guys, we'll see you in a couple of weeks for Suzuka on the F1 side. But in the next couple of days, there will be an episode talking about the Thermal Grand Prix and IndyCar that has literally just happened. I was enjoying watching that race when it was on screen and the truck wasn't melting and nobody could watch anything. But keep an eye out for episode 14, which will be about the recent IndyCar race. Fly, have you got something to say?
Would love to post our comment of the day, our comment of the show.
Let's do it.
And thank you for Last Resort for joining us. I think this is pretty fitting. Also, any comments, let's throw. He's been good so far.
We did cover this earlier on.
We did. So Last Resort, please watch the replay of the show. I believe he covered it within the first 5-10 minutes because we had to give him his praise, obviously. But yeah. Good job.
as I said, he's got my hopes up again. I'm considering buying stock in Lance again, and then he's going to do his usual, and he's going to let me down, and he'll end up driving it into a gravel trap after driving it into the grass. So yeah, but guys, thank you so much. Subscribe, like. Going to keep asking you to do that, and we're also available on Spotify. That will be up in the next day or two as well. But until next time, guys, stay safe, and we shall speak to you all very, very soon.